"Bring the Imperial Seal," General Varnock Drast ordered as the final delegate entered the council chamber. His voice cut through the murmurs of Siroki officers and silenced the air with its authority. The doors sealed shut behind them, their edges locking with a mechanical finality that echoed off the cold stone walls. No one spoke, and no one dared to question the gravity of what was about to unfold. Outside, the thin winter light filtered through the high windows of the Earth Council building, falling in pale bands that drew sharp lines across the room's polished floors. Dust particles danced in the light, momentarily catching the edge of the Sarathi war banner draped across the room. Its dark crimson symbol flickered in the flickering illumination, an unwelcome reminder of the Imperium's reach. "Counselors of Earth," Drast began, stepping forward with the slow, measured movements of a man who carried an empire's expectations on his shoulders. His eyes, set deep under a brow furrowed by years of command, flicked across the faces of the Terran delegates, each of them seated with rigid posture, their expressions unreadable. A cold draft seeped under the chamber doors, curling around the ankles of the gathered men like the last breath of winter. The tang of copper from the old heating vents mixed with the faint aroma of machine oil lingering from Earth's older generators, grounding the moment in human reality. Drast gestured toward the laser plasma display set in the center of the room, its light blue edges pulsing softly with the map of Earth's outer colonies. His hand hovered over it, and the Imperium's demands appeared in sharp script. Submission, tribute, compliance. "Let there be no misunderstanding," Drast said, his voice calm, each word weighted like iron. "The Sarathi Imperium extends this offer not out of compassion but out of necessity. Earth's refusal will not be tolerated. Comply and you retain your governance under our oversight. Resist and your worlds will burn to ash in the cold of space." The words fell heavy, absorbing the Council's breath. A hushed clinking of a pen against a datapad was the only response. Councillor Varin Malkoff shifted slightly in his seat, the leather creaking beneath his weight. He leaned forward, his fingertips brushing the edge of the cold marble table, his knuckles white. "You speak of compliance," Malkoff said, his voice even, though a flicker of unease passed through his eyes. "You speak of oversight. Yet your fleets hover in our skies like silent executioners." Drast regarded him with the measured calm of a man who had delivered these ultimatums to a dozen worlds before. "Your observation is noted. Submission is not a matter of negotiation. It is an act of survival." Another counselor, Elrin Voss, cleared his throat, his breath catching for a moment in the dry air. "And if survival is not our aim?" His voice was quiet, yet the words carried an undertone that made Drast's eyes narrow. For a moment, no one moved. The glow of the laser plasma display threw harsh light across Drast's face, carving deep lines around his mouth. He opened his mouth, then stopped, his expression tightening. The Earth Council's head of security, a man named Elrin Voss, adjusted the heads-up display embedded in the table, his finger tracing a flickering data line that pulsed with hidden meaning. The blue light flickered over his worn features, highlighting the tired lines of a man who had read too many threats in too many starfields. Drast's lips drew into a tight line. "Then you invite annihilation," he said finally. "Is that what you wish to offer your people, Councillor Voss? Finality in place of allegiance?" Voss let out a slow breath, the warmth of it curling in the chill air. "We offer our people the truth, that there is no security in submission." Silence stretched like a taut wire across the room, each man waiting for it to snap. The Sarathi officers behind Drast shifted uneasily, their ornate uniforms rustling against the stiff leather of their belts. Outside, a distant train rumbled over frost-crusted tracks, a reminder that even in the face of empire, Earth's heart beat on. The scent of old paper and polished wood rose from the Council's library shelves, mingling with the sharper tang of ozone from the comms tower relay. A low background hum that spoke of Earth's refusal to fade. Drast's hand fell to his side, fingers curling in a small gesture of irritation. "This is not an idle threat," he said. his tone dropping to a low rumble that carried the chill of interstellar winters. Operation Suppressus is already prepared. 3 of your outer colonies, Tethra, Ilion, and Pyrene, will be the first to fall should you resist. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle like an anchor in the chamber. And you will have only yourselves to blame for the ruin that follows. Malkov looked at him then, eyes clear and unflinching. The air between them seemed to tighten, the weight of a century of human defiance pressing against the Sarathi's imperial demands. We understand, Malkov said quietly. He turned his head slightly, meeting Voss's gaze. No words were spoken between them, yet something flickered in that look. An understanding, a finality. Then Malkov turned back to Drast. Your message has been received, General, he said, his voice a shade softer than before, though no less resolute. You will have our answer soon. Drast's jaw tightened. I expect nothing less, he said. With a curt nod, he turned and left the chamber, the doors unsealing with a hiss that cut through the air like the first blade of winter. His officers followed in his wake, their steps echoing down the marble corridor. Inside the chamber, silence held. The faint scent of burned circuitry from the aging heads-up displays mingled with the cold draft, a testament to Earth's refusal to modernize for another's convenience. Voss leaned back in his chair, his breath steady, though his heart thudded against his ribs. Malkov rose, his gaze sweeping the chamber. We know what they offer, he said, his voice a quiet promise to the empty air. Now, we answer. He stepped to the console at the far end of the room, his fingers moving with careful deliberation. The laser plasma display flickered, the map of Earth's colonies vanishing into darkness. He tapped a single command into the console, and across the stars, a signal pulsed outward. Initiating resolution sequence, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet in the silence of the chamber it was a hammerstroke. No alarms blared, no lights shifted from blue to red. Only the cold calm of Earth's resolve filled the room, as if every breath shared by the counselors was an oath spoken in the dark. Outside, the winter wind sighed against the ancient stones, carrying with it the scent of cold earth and distant seas. The Sarothi fleet loomed above, indifferent to the ground it overshadowed. Yet in the quiet of that council chamber, something older and deeper had been stirred. A refusal that ran deeper than survival. Malkov closed his eyes for a moment, his breath even. Then he opened them, and the decision was made. In the Sarathi war chamber, General Drast's report was transmitted to the High Throne. It spoke of Earth's quiet defiance, of refusal wrapped not in bravado but in calm certainty. His words carried weight, yet they fell on ears dulled by decades of conquest. Drast watched as the High Throne's advisors dismissed the report, their laughter hollow in the grand hall of conquest. He felt the first seed of doubt root in his gut, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air around him. As the last echoes of Earth's counsel faded from his mind, he knew this was not the beginning of Earth's surrender. It was the end. Everything the Imperium thought it could never lose. General Varnock Drast stood on the command deck of the Sarothi flagship, gazing at the tactical displays that mapped the targeted Earth colonies. The room buzzed with activity as officers relayed orders and monitored the progress of Operation Suppressus. The Sarothi fleet, a formidable assembly of warships, had entered orbit above Tethra, Ilion, and Pyrene, initiating the first phase of the operation. Commander, all units are in position, reported Subcommander Threx, his voice steady. Orbital platforms are locked on targets, awaiting your command. Drast nodded, his expression unreadable. Proceed. The order set a series of actions into motion. Orbital bombardments commenced, targeting key infrastructure on the colonies. Explosions lit up the surfaces below, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the atmosphere. The Sarathi forces operated with calculated efficiency, their movements choreographed to deliver maximal impact with minimal delay. On Tethra, the ground trembled as energy blasts struck the colony's power grid. Buildings collapsed and fire spread rapidly. Amid the chaos, civilians scrambled for shelter, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Emergency sirens wailed, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning materials. In a makeshift command center, Governor Elias Wren coordinated evacuation efforts. His voice, hoarse from shouting over the din, conveyed urgency. "Get the civilians to the shelters. Prioritize the infirm and children." A young officer approached, holding a communication device. "Sir, we've received a transmission from Earth. It's brief." Wren took the device and read the message. "Initiating resolution sequence." He stared at the words, a mix of determination and resignation in his eyes. So, it's begun. On Ilion, similar scenes unfolded. The colony's defenses were overwhelmed, and residents fled through smoke-filled streets. Amid the turmoil, a father clutched his daughter's hand, guiding her through the debris-strewn pathways. The child's eyes were wide with fear, her small frame trembling. "Stay close, sweetheart," the father urged, his voice firm despite the chaos. "We'll find safety." Above Pyrenees, the Serothi fleet maintained its formation, delivering calculated strikes to disable communication arrays and transportation hubs. The colony's governor, Marcus Hale, stood in the control room, watching as systems failed, one by one. "When status report," he demanded. "Communications are down," an officer replied. "Evacuation routes are compromised." Hale clenched his fists, frustration evident. "We need to hold out until Earth responds." But Earth remained silent, offering no immediate retaliation or assistance. This lack of response unsettled the Serothi commanders. Drast, observing the operation's progress, couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. "We haven't they counterattacked," he mused aloud. Threx glanced at him. "Perhaps they're regrouping, or their defenses are weaker than anticipated." Drast shook his head. "No, this silence feels calculated." Back on Earth, in the Central Command Facility, Counselor Varin Malkov monitored the situation. The room was tense, filled with the low hum of machinery and the soft tapping of keyboards. Malkov's gaze was fixed on the screens, displaying the colony's statuses. "Any word from the colonies?" he asked. An aide responded. "Minimal communication. Last messages confirmed the initiation of resolution sequence." Malkov nodded, his expression grim. "Then we proceed as planned." In the Serothi Command Center, Drast reviewed the latest reports. Despite the successful execution of Operation Suppressus, the lack of resistance from Earth gnawed at him. "Prepare for potential countermeasures," he ordered. "Maintain heightened alert status." As the Serothi forces held their positions, the devastated colonies lay in ruins. The survivors, though battered, displayed a quiet resilience. In underground shelters, they tended to the wounded, shared scarce resources, and waited. In one such shelter on Tethra, Governor Wren addressed the gathered civilians. "We may be under siege, but we are not defeated. Earth has a plan. We must trust in it and in each other." The people listened, drawing strength from his words. The atmosphere, though heavy with loss, was also filled with a steely determination. Drast, observing the aftermath from orbit, couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the true battle had yet to begin. The Serothi had delivered their message, but Earth's response remained an enigma. He turned to Threx. "Keep monitoring all channels. I want to know the moment Earth makes its move." Threx nodded. "Understood, General." As the Serothi fleet maintained its watchful presence, the silence from Earth loomed large, a void filled with anticipation and uncertainty. The initial triumph of Operation Suppressus now felt like the calm before a storm, the prelude to a confrontation that would test the very foundations of the Imperium's power. General Varnock Drast stood on the command deck of the Serothi flagship, his eyes narrowing as data lines shifted and broke apart across the display. The air carried the dry tang of recycled air mixed with the sharp bite of hot electronics, a scent that stung the nose and coated the back of the throat. The low vibrations of active consoles pressed into his boots through the polished black floors, each pulse a reminder of the Imperium's power that was slipping through his grasp. "Subcommander Threx," he said, voice measured. "Status of relay synchronization." Threx's hands moved with deliberate tension, the sharp clicks of control keys echoing in the quiet command chamber. General, we're losing the secondary transport lanes. Orders sent to Pyrene are being rerouted to uninhabited sectors. Supply lines are vanishing into uncharted coordinates. Drast's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his temple. Explain. Drex swallowed, his throat working as he stared at the jumble of conflicting command strings. They're not jamming us, sir. They're feeding our own infrastructure false data. Adjustments so subtle we didn't notice until entire divisions disappeared. The Sarathi flagship's wide windows displayed Earth's colonies below, shadows of destruction cast by the initial orbital strikes. Yet no Terran warships had risen to challenge them. No shots fired in retaliation. Instead, silence. Drast pressed his gloved hand against the edge of the display table, the cold surface grounding him in the moment's growing dread. Internal comms, he demanded. An officer's fingers flew across a smaller panel, sweat beading on his brow. Fragmented. Messages loop back on themselves, orders corrupted mid-transmission. It's as if we're fighting a shadow, nothing to target, only commands that twist in our grasp. The deck's lighting flickered as if in sympathy with the confusion. Drast turned to Threx, his eyes hard. Earth's doing this with our own systems. They've known how to poison the infrastructure we built together. Our trusted trade relays, our supply archives. On Earth, in a reinforced command bunker that smelled of old stone and oil, Counselor Varen Melkov leaned over a battered console, the glow of data streams illuminating the lines of fatigue and focus on his face. Operators worked in quiet synchrony around him, the air warm with the mingled scents of sweat and metal filings. The room vibrated faintly with the distant thrum of underground turbines, machines that hummed with patient certainty. Progress? Malkov asked, his voice even. A young technician answered, his fingers tracing new pathways on the console. Sirathi logistics are unraveling. They're redirecting themselves into our dead zones. No reinforcements are reaching the colonies. Supply convoys are scattering into empty space. Malkov nodded once, his shoulders settling as he absorbed the weight of that report. Good, he said quietly. Hold steady. No deviations. Back on the Sarathi command deck, the low whir of fans filled the silence between terse orders. Captain Resk approached, his uniform jacket rumpled, the lines of tension in his shoulders betraying a mind on the edge of panic. General, Resk said, his voice low, the shipyards around Ilion are reporting power failures. Their reserve grids are drawing on ghost signatures. Phantom supply draws that drain them dry before they can replenish. Drath's gaze cut across the room, catching the flicker of fear in Resk's eyes. And the rest of the fleet? Similar issues, sir. AI cores are looping diagnostic commands. No single system failure, only a spreading confusion. A cold weight settled in Drast's gut. He stepped forward, his boots tapping sharp against the polished deck. This is no random failure. This is Earth's hand on the throat of our command. Outside the flagship, the Sarathi fleet floated in disciplined formation, their dark hulls catching the weak light of distant stars. Inside each ship, the same story unfolded. Officers grappling with commands that turned to dust, maintenance crews tearing apart conduits that no longer obeyed, and relay hubs that offered only silence in reply. In one of the Sarathi logistical hubs, a young comms operator looked up from his console, his voice shaking. Sir, the Earth colonies. Their last transmission was the same. One line repeated, initiating resolution sequence. Then, nothing. Drast clenched his fists, the leather of his gloves creaking. They're not just surviving, he said, his voice low and measured. They're turning our own empire against us. He turned to Threx, the room's air sharp with the bite of hot circuitry and sweat. Begin rerouting through the tertiary networks. If Earth has buried sabotage in the primary lines, we'll bypass them. Threx hesitated. Sir, those networks haven't been active in decades. We don't even know if they're secure. Then we test them, Drast said, his tone final. We find the breach, or we become our own executioners. Across the Sarathi command deck, the weight of that order settled like a fresh gravity. Officers leaned closer to consoles, breath steady but eyes sharp, each man aware that this was no longer a battle of fleets. It was a battle for control itself. At the briefing, Malkov watched the final data confirmations stream in. The room smelled of cold stone and warmed circuitry, the quiet hum of old ventilation fans mixing with the soft rustle of fabric as men shifted in their seats. He leaned closer to the main console, voice calm. "Lock them into this cycle," he said, his breath steady. "Let them believe they can fix it. Let them exhaust themselves against illusions." In the bunker's quiet, the strategy settled like a weight. Earth's war was silent, carried in the shadows of data lines and power relays, a battle that struck at the mind rather than the body. Above, Drost straightened, the recycled air tasting of stale metal and tension. "I want updates every minute," he said, voice low but absolute. "We are not outmatched, only challenged. We will adapt." His officers answered with curt nods, their movements sharp but their eyes betrayed the truth. In the flickering light of dying displays, in the low drone of systems forced to rewrite themselves, they felt the empire slipping, line by line, breath by breath. In the quiet of Earth's bunker, Malkov stood alone for a moment, the soft rattle of old pipes in the walls, a lullaby of patience. He pressed a hand to the console's edge, fingers steady. "This is how they learn," he said softly, his voice lost to the low rush of distant turbines. "Not through battle, through the silence that shows them every empire is built on trust, and that trust can be taken away." And so the war unfolded, not in the flash of guns or the roar of engines, but in the silent shifting lines of control that turned the Sarathi Imperium's might into a ghost of itself. General Varnock Drast stepped into the High Throne's inner sanctum, the heavy door sealing shut behind him with a finality that resonated in the bones of the room. Tall columns of gray stone loomed over the gathering, casting elongated shadows that turned the once proud emblems of the Imperium into hollow echoes. The air smelled of dry marble and old incense, a stagnant scent that clung to every breath and weighed down every word. The High Throne sat at the end of the long chamber, a massive chair carved from obsidian, its edges worn smooth by centuries of command. Around it, advisors in dark robes shuffled data slates and exchanged sharp glances, their whispers too low to carry across the expanse. Drast moved forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor, the sound ringing in the air like an accusation. "General Drast," the High Throne's voice emerged with a calm born of habit, not certainty. "I trust you have come with answers, not complaints." Drast inclined his head, though his throat was tight. "My lord, Earth's sabotage of our infrastructure is systematic. Our convoys vanish into empty coordinates, commands are fractured before they leave the relays. The fleet's formation is crumbling because they have stolen the spine of our logistics." A flicker of irritation passed over the High Throne's face. "You speak as though Earth's shadows can unmake the will of the Imperium. Your task is to restore control, not question it." Drast's eyes locked onto the seated figure, every word he spoke measured and deliberate. "This is not an isolated breach. They have buried sabotage in systems we built on their trade. They exploit trust as their weapon." One of the advisors, his robe embroidered with the curling sigils of the Imperium's economic caste, scoffed. "The Terrans are a minor power. Their worlds are in ruin. They lack the means to challenge us beyond raids and feints." Drast's voice dropped, the air in the chamber tightening. "They have not engaged in battle. They have engaged in erasure, turning our unity into confusion. The longer we refuse to see it, the deeper this fracture will spread." A cold draft slipped through the old stone archways, stirring the folds of the advisor's robes. The quiet scrape of a stylus on a data slate punctuated the silence. The High Throne's hand rested on the arm of his seat, fingers drumming in slow rhythm against the worn surface. "You fear ghosts, General," he said, his tone dismissive. "The Imperium has survived far greater challenges than Earth Defiance. Your duty is to remind our fleets of that fact." Drast drew in a breath that tasted of old stone and cold air. "My lord, if we refuse to confront the truth, We will find ourselves speaking of our power in the past tense. Earth's fleets are shadows, but they are shadows that dismantle the core of everything we have built. The High Throne's expression turned stony, his gaze drifting past Drast as if the general's presence were an inconvenience rather than a counsel. "Enough," he said, his voice final. "You will return to your command. Remind your officers that the Imperium does not falter before Terran illusions." Drast's lips thinned. He bowed stiffly, though every muscle in his back protested the gesture. He turned from the throne, the stale air of the chamber pressing against his skin like a warning. As he stepped out into the corridor, the door closed behind him with a deep, resonant thud. Outside, the air was cooler, carrying the sharp scent of cold iron and the faint musk of ancient tapestries. A group of governors waited in the adjoining hall, their robes gathered close around them. Murmurs filled the space, questions of resource shipments, of redirected supplies, of whispers that Earth had done what no empire had dared before. "General," one governor said, a man with a hawk-like nose and eyes that darted with restless suspicion. "Our sector has seen no shipments for days. My people wait in the cold while the fleet burns fuel in idle orbits. What will you tell them?" Drast stopped, his voice even. "Tell them Earth has made this empire doubt itself. Tell them the only way forward is to see what we have allowed to happen." The governor's eyes narrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Your words will not comfort them." Drast met the man's gaze. "I do not speak to comfort. I speak to warn." The governor turned away, his shoulders tense as he joined another group of advisors already arguing in hushed voices. The corridors echoed with the discordant notes of command fracturing, each man speaking louder, yet none truly listening. In a distant Siroti command post, the low murmur of protest rose as officers fought to keep control of sectors slipping away. Orders arrived late or not at all. Transport grids sputtered, entire shipments gone as if swallowed by the cold void of space. The smell of sweat and old oil filled the air, the tang of desperation thick enough to taste. Captain Resk leaned over a flickering console, the edges of the screen lined with red error codes. His voice trembled with the strain of disbelief. "We were promised victory, General. Now our ships drift in confusion, and Earth says nothing." Drast's eyes flicked to the black expanse beyond the command post's window, the silent curve of Earth's hidden fleets, still nowhere to be seen. "They speak by absence," he said, his tone low and steady. "Their silence is their weapon, and we're too proud to hear it." Resk swallowed, his throat working as he stared at the data collapse unfolding line by line. "What do we do?" Drast's gaze hardened. "We endure. We find what remains loyal, and we prepare to face the truth that Earth has forced upon us." In the heart of the Imperium's capital, the High Throne broadcast once more to the Empire, his voice steady, his promises of victory ringing through the marble halls. Yet beneath his words lay a hollow echo, the first signs of an empire whose foundation had begun to crack. Outside the broadcast chamber, the statues of past emperors stood cold and silent, the light catching on cracks that ran like veins through their once immaculate forms. Dust gathered at their feet, the scent of old stone and forgotten vows thick in the stale air. And across the corridors of power the whisper grew, that Earth's silence was no accident, and that in that silence, the Imperium had begun to hear the end of its own certainty. General Varnock Drast stood in the command center of the Siroti capital, the air thick with the scent of overheated circuitry and the sharp tang of ozone. The once vibrant displays now flickered erratically, casting a sickly glow over the room. The usual hum of activity had been replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of static from the failing communication systems. "Status report," Drast demanded, his voice cutting through the oppressive quiet. An officer, his face pale and drawn, turned from his console. "Sir, we've lost contact with the shipyards at Virex and the orbital stations above Thalos. No explosions, no signs of attack, just silence." Drost's brow furrowed. And our sensors? What do they show? Nothing, General. It's as if the facilities have ceased to exist. Drast clenched his fists, the leather of his gloves creaking. He turned to another officer. Initiate a full diagnostic of our systems. I want to know if this is a malfunction or something more sinister. As the officer began the diagnostic, the room's lighting dimmed further, and the temperature dropped noticeably. A low, almost imperceptible vibration coursed through the floor, unsettling the already tense crew. General, the officer at the diagnostic station called out, his voice tinged with fear. Our systems are being overridden. Commands are being executed without our input. It's as if someone else is in control. Drast's eyes narrowed. Earth. He moved to the central console, attempting to input a manual override. The system rejected his commands, displaying a single line of text, access denied. Outside the command center, the skies above the capital darkened unnaturally. Civilians looked up in confusion as the sun was obscured, not by clouds, but by something else. Something massive and silent. In orbit, Fleet Umbra had arrived. The fleet's ships were unlike any the Serothi had encountered. Their surfaces absorbed light, rendering them nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. They moved with eerie silence, bypassing traditional defense systems and positioning themselves above key infrastructure points. Without firing a single shot, the fleet initiated its operation. Power grids failed, communication networks collapsed, and transportation systems ground to a halt. Entire cities were plunged into darkness, their inhabitants left in stunned silence. Back in the command center, Drast watched helplessly as the capital's systems failed one by one. The once proud symbols of the Imperium flickered and died, leaving behind only darkness. General, an officer whispered, what do we do? Drast turned to his men, his face a mask of grim determination. We endure, we adapt, and we remember this day, not as the end, but as the beginning of a new strategy. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. The Imperium had been brought to its knees not by brute force, but by the silent, calculated actions of an enemy that had mastered the art of unseen warfare. Fleet Umbra had come and gone, leaving behind no destruction, only a void where once there had been power. Commander Ran Voren stood at the command center of Fleet Umbra, the quiet around him taut with anticipation. The glow of status indicators washed over the men at their stations, the air crisp and sharp with the tang of recycled air that carried the bite of distant storms. He studied the final relay updates with a calm that belied the weight of what was to come. The Praetorian Legion has arrived at the Tarnis fold, his second-in-command said, his voice steady. They're holding position, awaiting orders to engage. Voren shifted his stance, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the console. Patch me through to General Drast, he said. The request was met with a single nod, and the comms relay crackled to life, the cold glow of the screen outlining Drast's face. Lines of fatigue etched deep into his features, his eyes dark and resolute. Commander Voren, Drast said, his tone more weary than defiant. I see you have chosen your ground well. Voren's gaze was unwavering. This is where the Empire will learn that power built on stolen trust is its own undoing. Drast's jaw tensed, the scent of sweat and hot wiring filling the air around him. You do not understand what you're about to do, he said. This is no battle, it's an execution. Voren's breath was steady, his words deliberate. Then let this be the final lesson. A long silence fell. Drast's eyes shifted to the data streams flooding past his officers, each line a testament to the Imperium's unraveling. I have men down there. Soldiers who believe they can turn this tide, he said, his voice low. What would you have me tell them? Voren's voice was calm. Tell them to remember, because nothing they have built here will remain. Drast closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then looked back, his face tight with acceptance. So be it, he said. We will watch, but we will not interfere. Voren nodded once. Understood. The link ended with a final crackle, and the command center fell into a tense stillness. Voren turned to his operator. Initiate Project RASP. The operator's fingers danced over the controls, each key press an echo of silent preparation. The screens shifted from deep blues to warning reds, the lights flickering with the sudden surge of commands. Outside, the black ships of Fleet Umbra repositioned, their forms disappearing into the dark sky, like shadows merging with deeper shadows. RASP protocols engaged, the operator reported. The Fold's core is responding. Vorin stepped forward, the air tasting of cold metal and distant ozone. He watched as the first signs of instability spread through the data relays, a quiet fracture that split the Sarathi control grid apart from within. On the Sarathi flagship, Dras felt the tremor run through the deck beneath his boots. A low, grinding vibration pulsed through the walls, and the lights overhead flickered with the strain. Officers looked to him, fear and confusion warring behind their eyes. "Report," Drast ordered, his voice steady. "Power fluctuations in the Fold stabilizer arrays," an engineer said, his voice tight. "All readings are within normal parameters, but the relay data is collapsing, looping in endless cycles." Drast drew in a slow breath, the recycled air harsh and dry. "Shut down the external feeds. Bring all systems in line manually." The engineer hesitated. "Sir, the stabilizers are no longer responding to direct input. External commands are overriding every attempt to isolate them." Drast's eyes narrowed, the weight of the moment settling into his chest like cold iron. "We're not fighting Earth's fleet," he said softly. "We're fighting our own arrogance." In Fleet Umbra's command center, Vorin's eyes never wavered from the readouts. "Status of the core collapse," he asked. "On schedule," the operator replied. "The Fold's harmonics are destabilizing. The Praetorian Legion's ships are cut off from all contact beyond the Fold." Vorin nodded, his hand tightening on the edge of the console. "Complete the sequence, no deviation." Outside, the Tarnis Fold flickered, a subtle distortion rippling across the cold darkness of space. The Legion's ships, once the pride of the Sarathi fleet, hovered in place, suspended in a prison of light and silence. Within the Fold, energy surged, folding back upon itself in a slow, unstoppable implosion. On the Sarathi flagship, the final alarms echoed through the command deck. Drast stood alone at the center, the air around him heavy with the scent of sweat and cooling metal. He looked to the empty comms channel where Vorin's image had been. "Observe," he said to his men, his voice stripped of anything but resolve. Nothing more. In that moment, the Fold's horizon cracked. Light fractured outward, refracted and twisted, as if the very air had become a blade. Then, in an instant, it was gone. The energy that had once held the gateway open folded in on itself, leaving behind only darkness and the distant glimmer of stars that no longer reached the Legion. Vorin watched the collapse in silence, his breath steady, his eyes reflecting the fading light of the Fold's death. "Seal all channels," he said quietly. "The operation is concluded." The operator's fingers moved swiftly, the data streams flickering to black. In the stillness that followed, Vorin turned from the console, his face unreadable in the glow of the last operational panels. In that final silence, Earth's power was made clear, not through conquest, but through the erasure of empire itself. In the cold night of the Tarnis Fold, no fleet rose to challenge it. The empire that had ruled through command and threat now faced an emptiness it could not fill. And in that emptiness, the future was rewritten. The silent corridors of the Sarathi High Council stood empty, the banners of empire hanging limp in the stale air. Dust clung to the tapestries, their once proud symbols dulled by the weight of years and the finality of what had come to pass. The scent of old stone filled the hall, carrying with it the memory of commands that would never again be given. Governor Iren Dalt stepped through the arched entryway of the council chamber, his boots scuffing against the cold marble floor. He paused at the center of the room, the echo of his steps fading into the cavernous quiet. Around him, the tall-backed chairs sat vacant, the thrones of power left to gather dust. He placed a small data pad on the central table, its cracked surface flickering with the final message he would ever send under the Imperium's seal. His fingers hovered for a moment before pressing the transmission key. By my authority as governor of Sector Lernus, I declare independence from the Sarathi Imperium, he said, each word carrying the weight of a choice he had never thought he would make. We will not fight for a throne that no longer stands. Across the fractured territories, 7 more governors echoed his words, each speaking in turn from chambers that had once been the beating heart of Sarathi rule. Their declaration spread like a quiet wave, each voice measured, each statement final. The Imperium's central relay station, a facility that had once pulsed with the power of conquest, sat dark and cold. Officers moved through the corridors with mechanical efficiency, their expressions blank, their movements stripped of purpose. A single transmission from Earth played on a loop, its calm tone carrying across the silent halls. This empire ends here, the message said. We will not rebuild it. The words needed no embellishment. They held no threat, no promise of conquest, only the finality of an ending that could not be denied. In the council chamber, Governor Dalk watched the message play out on the cracked screen. The quiet crackle of static was the only sound that followed. He exhaled, the faint tang of old air sharp in his nose. The weight of centuries pressed down on his shoulders, yet he felt no anger, only the cold certainty that the Imperium's time had ended. He turned away from the table, his gaze drifting to the statues of Sarathi emperors that lined the far wall. Their stone faces, once proud and unyielding, seemed to watch him with silent judgment. Cracks spiderwebbed across their forms, the weight of forgotten victories splintering the illusions of permanence. In a command bunker beneath the old palace, the last of the Imperium's generals gathered around a flickering display, their voices low, their shoulders bowed. One by one, they removed their rank insignias, setting them on the table with the care of men laying to rest the bones of an ancestor. General Varnock Drast stood among them, his face lined with exhaustion. We have no orders to give, he said, his voice stripped of command. The empire we served has already passed into memory. An aide looked to him, the question clear in his eyes. Drast met his gaze evenly. There will be no final strike, no last attempt to salvage what cannot be saved. We will not waste lives for a throne that no longer claims dominion over the stars. Outside the bunker, the old city lay quiet beneath a gray sky. The scent of rain-soaked stone mixed with the faint whiff of dying embers from abandoned hearths. The air carried no sound but the sigh of the wind between the broken spires of the palace. In Earth's command center, Counselor Varin Malkov sat with the final transmission log open before him. The glow of the data streams reflected in his eyes, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the console. The quiet of the room was absolute, the only motion the slow blink of status indicators that marked the end of an era. Send the final sequence, he said, his voice soft but firm. The technician nodded, fingers moving with quiet efficiency. The message spread through the relay networks, carrying Earth's final words to every corner of what had once been the Sarathi Imperium. This empire ends here. We will not rebuild it. In the broken halls of the Sarathi governors, the words settled like dust on old stone. No reply came. There was nothing left to say. Governor Dalk walked the length of the council chamber one last time, his footsteps the only sound in the empty space. He paused at the door, turning back for a moment to look at the room where power had once lived. His breath left him in a slow exhale, the faint taste of stale air a reminder of all that had been lost. He stepped through the doorway, the cold draft of the corridor brushing against his face. Behind him, the doors closed with a soft click, the final punctuation on the end of an empire. In the silent aftermath, Earth's presence remained only as a quiet truth. That power is not eternal, that empires can end without fire or fanfare. In the hearts of those who had once ruled, that truth echoed, stripping away the illusions of permanence until all that was left was the quiet acceptance of what had always been inevitable. General Varnock Drast sat in the last occupied chair of the council chamber, the cold marble beneath him a reminder of how quickly the heat of power could vanish. The cracked data slate in his hands flickered with the final report he would ever write. His breath moved slow and shallow in the heavy air, tinged with the faint scent of dust and old stone. He typed each word with deliberate calm, the click of the keys echoing in the quiet chamber. "They never surrender," he wrote, the words pressing into the silence like a final decree. "They end empires." He pressed the send key. The report vanished into the historical archive, a final testament to the fall of the Serothi Imperium and the shadow that Earth had cast upon it. Outside, the twin moons bathed the empty courtyards in pale light. Earth's ships had vanished, leaving no footprint in the sky, no echo of conquest, only the truth of what had been undone. In the darkened city below, torches guttered in the wind as governors gathered to decide their futures without the Imperium's voice above them. Draft rose from the chair and stepped out into the corridor. His boots scuffed against the worn stone, the air carrying a faint trace of the night's cold. He paused at a cracked pillar, running his fingers across the rough surface, feeling the weight of the centuries that had pressed upon these walls, now undone by a single human phrase that refused to bend. In Earth's command center, Counselor Varin Malkov watched the transmission logs flow across the console, his face drawn in quiet thought. Each line that appeared spoke not of victory, but of the ending of a cycle. His hand rested lightly on the console's edge as he gave the final order. "Send the last confirmation," he said, his voice low and steady. The technician keyed the sequence. The message traveled through the relay towers, reaching every corner of the broken empire with words that would not be forgotten. "This empire ends here. We will not rebuild it." The message carried no arrogance. It offered no threat. It was the closing of a book that would never be reopened. In the council chamber, Drast watched as the final flicker of data on the wall display went dark. A quiet settled into the space. An absence not of fear, but of finality. He turned away from the flickering shadows of the old empire's banners, each one a relic of power that no longer held weight. In the dark streets of the capital, the governors of the former vassal worlds gathered in small circles, voices low and measured. One by one, they spoke of the need to rebuild, not as subjects of a throne, but as leaders of their own people. No longer did they speak of tribute or conquest. They spoke of survival and of finding their own place in a galaxy that had reminded them of the cost of arrogance. Drast moved among them, his footsteps measured, the air around him cold with the memory of everything they had lost. A young governor looked to him, his face drawn with uncertainty. "What do we call ourselves now?" he asked, the words carrying the weight of generations born under a banner that no longer flew. Drast's answer was quiet. "Call yourselves what you must," he said. "But remember what was written here tonight. Remember what Earth has shown us, that no empire stands forever, and no power can outlast the truth of its own limits." The young governor nodded, his breath clouding in the night air. "And Earth, what of them?" "Dull the memory of our mistakes," Drast said, his eyes steady. "They will not rule us. They will not conquer. They have ensured only that no empire will rise again to threaten them." In Earth's command center, Malkov closed the final log, the console's glow reflecting in his tired eyes. "We will watch," he said to his aides, his voice quiet. "But we will not stand above them. No thrones, no crowns. Only the quiet promise that no empire will ever again grow so blind." The aides nodded, their movements careful, each one aware of the finality in the room. Outside the window, the night sky stretched cold and still, the quiet flicker of Earth's orbital stations, a silent testament to a power that had learned to wait. Fleet Umbra drifted in deep orbit, its ships dark against the starlight, their presence felt more than seen. They did not claim the planets below. They did not land or demand fealty. Their silence was enough. Earth had spoken, and in that quiet, the Imperium's final chapter had been written. Drast returned to his quarters one last time. The air was cool, the scent of the old stone walls grounding him in the moment. He sat at the small table by the window, the final transmissions still echoing in his mind. He picked up the battered data slate, the screen dim in the faint glow of the twin moons. He read his own final words once more. They never surrender. They end empires. A breath left him, slow and steady. He set the slate aside, his hand resting against the worn wood of the table. Outside the window, the night stretched on, quiet and unbroken. Drast closed his eyes, letting the weight of centuries settle into the quiet of the room. In that silence, there was no triumph, no sorrow. Only the knowledge that Earth had not come to claim or to conquer, but to ensure that no throne would ever rise to challenge them again. And in that final breath of quiet, a new galaxy was born, and carry it in the memory of stars that had watched an empire fall.